Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. And for those of you who are new to listening to this program, you can check out the archives. We've got some great interviews with past smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of companies ranging from Netflix to Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, and many more. And I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25. We help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And today's guest is Bruce Eckfeldt. He's a consultant, coach, author, speaker. He talks on a range of topics. He started his career as an architect, transitioned to digital product development early in his career, and has had a number of different stops along the way. In 2003, he founded Cyrus Innovation, one of the first lean agile consulting firms. Worked with companies such as, you may have heard of Boeing, Kaplan Test Prep, Schuster, all kinds of interesting companies like that. It was an Inc. 5000 honoree for 5 years in a row. That is insane. So we're going to talk about how that was even possible. That is really, really difficult to do. Of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25, where we help B2B businesses get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with Done For You podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn all about what we do at rise25.com. Bruce, pleasure to have you here. And I love to ask people about how they were as a kid, how entrepreneurial they were as a kid. Last weekend, I took my 12-year-old and we had a coffee and donut stand outside of his brother's flag football game, and he made $51, which is not too bad for a couple hours work. I was super proud of him. Nice. But for you did bubblegum as a kid. That was your entrepreneurial side hustle.
Yeah, I think my best was must have been sixth grade. I'm gonna kind of stretch my brain a little bit. I realized I could buy big bags of bubble gum, 100 pieces of bubble gum for 99 cents, and I could turn around and sell it for a nickel. And I made a killing for probably 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks, until I got called into the principal's office, and the janitors were finding volumes of gum stuck under the desks of the sixth grade classrooms. So they gave me a deal. I could keep selling, but I had to clean all the desks with a scraper every afternoon. And so I decided to shut down that business. But that was probably my first real arbitrage kind of selling opportunity that I found. But I grew up in Minnesota, so I did shoveling snow, I cut lawns, I did all sorts of things to kind of make money here and there. But
Were you grew up in an entrepreneurial family, or is this something that just kind of?
No, I was kind of the black sheep. I'm the only non-MD PhD in my family. All of my parents, my sibling is all medicine.
Jeez, what a disappointment you were.
Yeah, I was. The holiday dinner conversations were always a little off for me half the time because I couldn't understand the words they were using.
Right. Did you never feel any pressure as a kid to go down that route?
I don't know if I felt pressure. I certainly felt like I was going down a slightly different route, right? In terms of, everything from, activities, interests, people, obviously the things I was reading and doing and things like that. I mean, I was there's kind of this combination of pretty strong in sciences and math and things like that. And then I was an artist. So I did a lot of fine arts when I was young. So architecture was kind of this mashup between those two, which is why I ended up in that program. And it was great. I think it was a great combination of my skills and interest and capability. But as you mentioned, I got out of architecture and got into digital product design, then I got into software development, and I sold that company and got into kind of coaching and advising. And I like to say that I still work with puzzles. It went from bricks and windows and 2x4s to digital bits and bytes to now it's people and psychology and teams. So
did you ever experience, I wonder if this was an issue for you, as I went from being a lawyer, which was so easy for my family members to explain, my parents like, oh, he's a lawyer, to all of a sudden, I don't know, he does something with the internet. Yeah. Was that a challenge at all?
Oh yeah,
Especially with
I
a bunch
stopped.
of siblings that are all MDs.
Yeah, I stopped trying at some point, right? Because the problem is I just started getting calls from folks that their computer wasn't working.
Right, exactly. They think you're the local tech support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My classic answer is, well, just restart it. It'll be fine.
That does solve most problems when it comes to
Exactly.
computers. Yeah. How did you end up going down the lean agile route? Like, how did you figure out that that was kind of going to be the thing that you build a business around?
Yeah, so I'm not, I mean, I can write code, but if I'm writing code on a real project, something's gone horribly, horribly wrong, right? Like I'm really focused on kind of strategy, product strategy, market opportunities. Like where do we have a need in the market? Where can we develop a solution? Like that is my thing. So really software became just a tool for creating solutions. And I got very focused on how do we create software, particularly how do we create software to meet a market need? And I had a really fortunate opportunity when I left architecture. I started working with a company out of New York that got acquired by a Swedish company, and they were very well funded, and they had 14 offices all over Europe, and so they had some big names in it. They ended up hiring a gentleman named Ivar Jakobsen as their chief process officer, and he was one of the three, what we call three amigos. So those that are know the history of software development. The three amigos were three software developers that came up with this idea of object-oriented programming. So older sort of programming languages were very procedural. This was the first time they had this idea of object-oriented programming. So I ended up actually being able to work with him for almost 6 months. He came to New York and I went to Sweden for quite a bit. And we started to really look at software development methodology in this kind of web age of, web applications, distributed applications. And he got me really interested in software methods. And he was working with some people that were the very early founders of extreme programming, which was the kind of first iteration of an agile software development. So I had a chance to work with them. That got me very into this whole highly iterative, customer feedback driven, evolutionary kind of architecture in software development. And I realized that was it. Like that was the way we were going to build a better software products. So I got very involved in software methodology, which is we founded Cyrus based on being a lean, agile consulting company. So we ended up working with many, many companies on building out software teams using lean, agile.
And I know a tiny bit about Agile because we had a client that was in that world. And I think Agile doesn't really predate Cyrus by very much. You must have been really, really early in the early days of this concept.
Yeah, there was a couple of people doing things in the late 90s, but it was really early 2000s. There's a whole Agile manifesto and Snowbird where a bunch of people got together and they coined it, or they kind of brought together a whole bunch of ideas, and we put kind of this rubric of Agile on it. And then Lean came out, Scrum came out. There's kind of an amalgam of things, but there were all software development methodologies that were very customer feedback driven, short iterations, customer feedback driven, and the software code itself was something that was fundamentally designed to be changed and iterated on very, very quickly. So there was a series of testing frameworks and the ways you write code, what we call object-oriented or pattern-driven code development that allowed that to happen. And so that was kind of the birth of Agile. And it's grown significantly since then. And it's kind of the way that most companies develop software at this point. But yeah, the beginning we were extreme programming. So the joke was we get on parachutes, jump out planes with laptops, right? And that, it was new and kind of crazy in the beginning, but it ended up becoming a very important mainstream way of developing software.
Okay. So I have to know how you were an Inc. 5000 business 5 years in a row, especially in consulting. I mean, that's understandable, like in software or something like that. But in the consulting world, that is absolutely nuts. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know now to be an Inc. 5000 business, at least today, it has to be over $2 million a year in revenue. And I think something like 80% growth, which I just found out it's over a 3-year period, not a 1-year period. But nevertheless, I mean, you must have gone like from 2 to 20 million in 5 years, or 2 to 200 million. I don't know what the number is.
Yeah, so it was, some of this is catching it just at the right size. So when you first qualify, like being big enough to first qualify, and then it's a game of denominator, right? Like, so as long as your denominator is low enough and your numerator, like you can divide that, a lot. Yeah, we just happened to hit at the right time, and we grew very consistently for 5 years in a row. So we kept making the list. And look, it was significant growth, right? I mean, especially as services company, it's about people, and so you're adding a lot of people. But a lot of it is just being super consistent in your growth process, so that you can have consistent results year over year. I think a lot of people end up coming off the list after a year or two because they have a bad year, right? They have a down year, so you don't make the list, and then they come back on a couple of years later. We were fortunate. I think, I think we were smart in a lot of ways, but also we were kind of the right place at the right time. So
other than it being kind of like a outside acknowledgement that you're doing something right, what did it do for you? Why, now you help other businesses. So I guess it gives you external credibility because people say, oh, he's an Inc. 5000 CEO, but why do people want to hit that list?
Well, I mean, I guess in terms of things I learned about it, I wrote an article on this somewhere. It's back on Inc., in kind of the archive somewhere. But, for me, it was like, I never planned on being an entrepreneur, right? It was kind of an accidental, we had an opportunity to work on a project. We put an LLC together to do it. That led to another project that led to hiring some people. So for me, it was kind of this strange validation that, oh, we're actually a real business and I'm actually an entrepreneur. So on one hand, it was, I think, confidence building for me, or kind of validating for me to realize, oh, I need to think of myself this way. And so what does that change in terms of my mindset and what I do? The other thing that happened is I went through a very extreme kind of imposter syndrome moment, right? Where it was like, I'm at this conference looking around at all these people who are creating all these businesses. I'm like, what am I doing here? Right? Like, I don't have any business.
Was this like an Inc. conference or what conference?
Oh, it was the actual, like the first time we made the list, and I'm there at the award ceremony.
Got it. And you're like, what am I doing?
On my way to walk up to get the award. And I'm like, should I really be here? Right. This feels really awkward. And it wasn't until later that night that I was having, drinks with some of the other winners, and it was down in DC. They had this fire pit thing. We were sitting around the fire pits, and we had a chance to really start talking. And I realized that everyone else there was in that same situation, right? Yeah. Everyone else was like, I don't really know if I deserve this, or I didn't really plan on being here, and this is a little awkward. So I think on one hand, it gave me a lot of confidence, and the other hand, it got me to question my own kind of rationale, like, what do I really want to do with this? But then also gave me this kind of like, but that's everyone else's case too. So it was a nice kind of acknowledgement and kind of transition for me in terms of really thinking of myself as a business person, which then helped me through the rest of my business journey. And then, after I sold my company, it was pretty clear that my experiences and what we'd been able to do was pretty unique. And so I got a lot of calls from folks that were like, hey, can you help me with strategy? Can you help me build out this team? We need to figure out this operational process. So I started doing some kind of fractional executive work, fractional COO work, and then ended up focusing purely on coaching about 8 years ago.
This stuff you were talking about there with kind of feeling like the imposter syndrome. I've talked about this before in this podcast. I belong to Entrepreneurs Organization. You've been involved in Entrepreneurs Organization. A lot of people are drawn to it for that reason, because you had certain limitations, things holding you back, and it's an opportunity to talk about these things with other people who are going through something similar. Mm-hmm. Did you join EO around the time that you were experiencing that? And what was that journey like?
I think that was like within the year, I think, of that first time we were on the list. And I realized that I needed to think of myself as an entrepreneur, and then I needed to think about what was my entrepreneur kind of journey going to be like, and what did I need to do to be a better business person. And finding an organization of other folks that are in this position was one of my key objectives. So EO came up. I remember meeting Matt Weiss, was the president of EO at the time, New York EO, and he was running one of these kind of intro session things. I remember talking with him, and I was just like, where have you been all my life? like I need more of you and people like you. So I got into EO, and that I think was just hugely eye-opening, right? Having a chance to meet with other entrepreneurs, and then, my first forum group, and getting really the forum experience where, honestly, it wasn't so much that, they were going to train me or something, or I was going to learn stuff, but just having a container to be able to bring my challenges to, where the people in that group didn't have a dog in the fight, right? They weren't an employee, they weren't a business partner, they weren't a spouse, right? So I could bring an issue there, and their only concern was my success, They weren't an investor, right? They weren't worried about getting paid. They weren't worried about like a relationship, right? They just wanted to see me be successful and happy and healthy, and being able to have that kind of support. And I'll call it feedback. I mean, we're careful about giving advice, and but that kind of perspective and feedback was huge, right? I don't know where else I would have gotten that.
Yeah. Now, not every EO member then goes and becomes a certified scaling up coach. So talk about what the scaling up coaching is and why you decided to pursue that after exiting your business.
Yeah. Like I said, I did a couple of fractional COO roles, and built out a couple of teams, helped a couple of companies with some transitional strategy and work. And I realized two things. One is when I come into a company, Monday from about 8 a.m. to noon, I come up with a huge amount of value because I'm coming in fresh, I'm coming in new, I see patterns, I see issues. I've been in enough situations, just being a consultant for a very long time, I kind of know that consultative process of diagnosing things, seeing the patterns, finding different solutions, figuring out how to implement. The first 4 hours of the week, I added huge amounts of value. And then the rest, the 36 hours of the rest of the week was just all implementation. And I basically looked at the situation. I was like, you know what I'd really like to do is just do 4 hours with 8 different companies during the week. And I realized that
sounds like fun, right?
Yeah, well, it's that, and I realized I had a pretty unique ability to quickly assess things and kind of get the landscape, see the pattern, figure out a couple of things that need to get shifted pretty quickly. And I realized I wanted to create that. I wanted to create the ability to have lots of different business experiences, see kind of the bigger patterns that happen across companies again and again and again, and be able to leverage that, be able to come into a new company and help them understand, all right, look, this is what's working, this is what's not working. Here are some patterns that tend to work in these kind of situations with these kind of companies. Let's apply them quickly so we can get some growing going without having to spend 6 months trying things. So as I looked at coaching, I realized that I wanted to create frameworks and tool sets to be able to help leaders quickly figure out what their issue was, solutions they could apply and implement those things, and then find the next problem. And so coaching was kind of the model. And I, looking at the various coaching platforms out there, scaling up was, for me, I used EOS, I used Scaling Up, I used MAP, I used Strategic Coach. I had them all in my personal experience. Scaling Up was the best sort of tool set that would allow me to create my own practice and the own way of doing things without being too prescriptive, that I felt was really going to serve me well and then serve the clients that I wanted to be working with well.
And whether it's your background in architecture or Agile, you seem to be drawn towards working within some kind of structure or guidelines or framework.
Yeah, I love tool sets, frameworks, patterns, models. One of the things we use in Agile software development is something called pattern languages, which actually borrowed from architecture. A guy named Christopher Alexander wrote a book. I'm looking for it. I was going to pull it down. It's called Pattern Languages, and he talks about building patterns, like windows on 2 walls creates a nice space. So he has hundreds of these architectural patterns. Software development looked at that and said, oh, I think we can do the same thing in software development. So we have things like the facade pattern or a factory pattern, and they're ways of writing code such that when someone new comes into it and they know pattern languages, they can say, oh, this is a construction pattern, this is a factory pattern, right? I know kind of what's going on here. So you can solve common problems using a standard model. Same thing is true in business, right? We can use a lot of these standard models to solve standard business problems. Each case is going to be different, and we're going to have to adopt it. But I love that idea of finding commonalities and then finding frameworks that apply to those commonalities in different ways. So that's what I do as a coach.
So this all makes sense. So architecture, Agile, scaling up, frameworks, MAP, all those other frameworks. Naturally, the next thing is going to be, I'm going to start a podcast about cannabis, right? Like makes total sense.
Of course.
So
I'm sure your audience is like, of course.
This is January 2018. You're like, I'm going to start, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to start a podcast about cannabis because I want to build my network in the cannabis world.
Yeah. So that was, so I realized as a coach, I can do a lot of things as a coach, right? Like the models, the patterns, the things can apply to just about every business. But I realized as a coach, strategically, like I needed to focus on things, right? Like I wasn't going to be able to be good at every single type of business and every single industry. So I needed to pick a couple. And I'd done a lot of services. So I do a lot of sort of consulting kind of services, professional services work. But then I had picked a couple of my friends, entrepreneurial friends, EO friends to some extent, started getting involved in cannabis. And then I broke my back 2017. And so I went through a major surgery and I came out of that. They gave me a big bottle of Percocet. And my cannabis friends, you should try pot. So I was like, oh, so I did. And I was an athlete in school. I really never did it before. And it was amazing. Like my ability to manage pain, to deal with inflammation. And then I was sleeping like a baby, like it got me personally interested in cannabis as a plant medicine. I was like, this is fascinating. I got more involved in it. And then professionally, I started working with some of these cannabis entrepreneurs. And so that came together and I was like, you know what? I think this is an area. I think this is a growing industry. They're going to need the kind of coaching that I do. And if I can learn how cannabis works, both as an industry, and I mean, there's a whole range of things that happen in cannabis, that I think it could be a real niche for me. So we started the podcast as a way to really build on a network, to build on content, understand the industry, and really take a business lens to it. Because there was a lot of sort of more pot culture podcasts out there, but not as much purely on the business side. So we doubled down on that. We've done 400 episodes over the years. Wow. I mean, at this point, like I can pretty much call any cannabis CEO and get a call because they know me through the podcast at this point.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you got lots of clients from it.
Yeah, it's about 30% of my business is cannabis related. So I tend to work with the bigger, more complicated businesses. So labs, some bigger cultivation facilities, processors, some big packaging kind of products and stuff. So the fun thing about cannabis is there's a really broad range of industries that are involved in cannabis, right? You have everything from ERP systems, technology systems, HR, there's legal issues, right? Like there's a whole world of cannabis companies.
Yeah. And you know, I haven't followed it too closely, but I've seen the headlines. I'm here in California. We're recording this in February 2023. And there are all kinds of headlines about the cannabis industry on the verge of collapse, a lot of companies possibly collapsing. Tell us a little bit about what you're observing in the industry now.
Yeah. So, well, the big thing to know is it's state by state, right? So every state has its own rules and regulations. And because it's still federally illegal, you can't, there's no interstate commerce. So it creates a situation where every state is its own market. So, so California, one of the more mature markets, there was a vast overproduction of cannabis over the last 12 months. So there's a glut in the market, which decimated pricing, right? It went from $5,500 a pound to $1,100 a pound in the matter of weeks. And so, it basically wiped out a lot of folks in cannabis, whether you're down at the cultivation, production side, processing side. So there's a lot of swings in the market. And some of it is because, the demand's kind of all over the place, right? Like we're still, people are still coming online. There's the use of cannabis is shifting a lot. Policy and regulations has this huge impact. So taxation is a big issue. And now, without getting into too much detail, because of the federal illegality of it, you can't do certain things. Normal business operations can't be deducted and stuff. So it creates a really awkward tax situation for a lot of these companies, which means they're not super profitable, or at least they really struggle with finances. Then you have issues not being able to bank accounts being closed. So that puts financial stress. My
wife works up in Sonoma County, and she teaches at a college, and the college went and did a tour. It's a big industry up there. They went and did a tour of a grow industry. This is about 4 years ago now. And they were bringing basically a truck full of cash to Sacramento, to the state capitol, multiple times a week, I think, to pay their taxes. That's how they had to pay the taxes. It was nuts. It was absolutely crazy.
Not only that, the IRS charges you 1% to pay your taxes in cash.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
So you roll up with a truck with cash, they're going to add 1% to that bill.
Well, yeah. So I got no other way I can pay. Can I Venmo you? And I don't know if they have any other option. Yeah.
You can't.
So that's fascinating. And then you started another podcast, Rinse and Repeat, this time in psychedelics, tripping outside the box.
It's a little different in that, a lot of the folks that I've worked with in cannabis over the years have started to look at psychedelics. Another it's a little more complicated. It's more than just plant medicine, and the industry is quite different because it's a little bit more of a drug development model industry and pharmaceutical model. But yeah, several folks over there, and we work at this time I partner with a venture capital firm, and they're making placements in early stage psychedelic companies, and we interview investors and CEOs and kind of policymakers in the psychedelic space. And that was fascinating. I mean, it's still very early, and it's going to be a much longer tail just because of the drug FDA approval and drug development model. But we're dealing with things like people, addiction and depression and PTSD. I mean, we're hitting significant public health issues that have kind of not been very well served by traditional pharmaceutical and therapeutic models. So yeah, there's a lot of fascinating things going on in psychedelics.
It does seem like this pattern is going to play out the way that it did with cannabis and state by state over the last really 15, 20 years, going from, first legalization for health purposes, then legalization for recreational purposes, have been like state after state. And it seems like probably something similar will happen with psychedelics.
It's going to be a little different because I think that one of the challenges with cannabis, it's you really can't clear your FDA approval process very well, because FDA approval process is based on what we call a single molecule kind of approval. So you're taking a drug, a molecule, a compound, and putting it through some kind of clinical trial. Cannabis is this entourage mix of cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids and stuff. And so you haven't been able to really get anything approved for medical use. Psychedelics is much easier. Like we can take psilocybin, we can take MDMA, LSD, and we can actually get them approved. So I think for a while you're going to see states doing this kind of quasi-rec, quasi-adult use, decriminalization, legalization for some use. But then you'll start to see these things approved. Like MDMA is pretty close to passing FDA approval for PTSD treatment. And then you'll see this big, more kind of healthcare model wave come through as these things get approved for certain conditions and certain things. The issue there is interesting. It's going to be more about the clinical, the building up the clinical capacity, because the treatments are assisted therapy processes. So we use MDMA in combination with traditional therapy process. Well, we need to train tens of thousands of therapists on being able to do this to serve the hundreds of thousands of people that we have with these conditions. So that's it. That's a couple of companies are really working on this bottleneck of how do we train therapists on psychedelic assisted therapy.
Where is the opportunity for you in the cannabis model? You're coaching CEOs, but where do you think you fit in that scenario?
Yeah, so my niche in coaching has always been around really figuring out what is your differentiated strategy. Like, how do we really approach the market based on who your core customer is, what the competitive landscape is, and where the white space is. Like, where do you have opportunity to differentiate around key attributes? And then how do we turn that into an operational model in terms of key capabilities that you have operationally, and then road mapping that over time. So a strategy development process, and then building out the leadership team, right? Building up leadership capacity and making sure that we've got the right people to really solve the next level of the organization. That's what I do. And psychedelics is, cannabis isn't great that way because it's shifting so quickly and we have to build up these companies. Psychedelics will be there in the next 12, 24 months. You'll start to see the real growth element of those kick in. And that's what I do.
Well, I love hearing people tell their stories, especially when they've switched from one industry to another, just kind of following their passion, following their interests, taking life where it leads them. So thank you for sharing your story. And the other piece that I really love about that is hearing, and I call this my gratitude question, is hearing the people that you are grateful to as you look back on your career who helped you, especially at those critical junctures during your career, helped you to establish yourself in a new industry. So who would you want to shout out and just acknowledge in your journey?
I know. I've been thinking about this one. The one that actually comes to mind, a guy named Tom Nicholson. And Tom was the founder of the company that I first worked with when I went from architecture to interactive media to digital product development. And the reason I call him out is, he saw the opportunity, right? Like, I was an architect, right? Like, I was trained as an architect, and this new world of digital strategy and digital product development coming up. And he was looking for folks from different industries with different backgrounds that could be part of this new kind of wave of technology. And I think, he really saw something in me and my background. And, took me under his wing and helped me kind of get into this industry. And then when I left to start my own company, he was highly supportive. And actually, about a year and a half ago, I ended up working with one of his portfolio companies. He sold his business and is an angel investor. Ended up working with one of his portfolio companies. And so just that idea of someone that sees an opportunity, helps you kind of get a chance to cut your teeth in the industry and then supports you over time. Yeah, I think Tom is someone who, and I probably haven't thanked enough over the years, but is someone that comes to mind as being really kind of influential in my kind of overall professional development and get me to where I am today.
That's great. Bruce, this has been really interesting. Where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
Yeah, thanks, John. So Eckfeldt.com, ECKFELDT.com is my website. It's just Bruce@Eckfeldt is my email. That has all of my information for the most part. Podcasts, ScalingUpServices.com, ThinkingOutsideTheBud.com, PsychedelicInvest.com. You can certainly check those things out. Always looking for interesting people to interview there. So would love to get feedback and have people listen.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Bruce.
Thanks, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.